You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Day 2 of joint training camp practices for the Denver Broncos and Minnesota Vikings is in the books. We are now a day and a half away from the Broncos' first preseason action on the road against the Minnesota Vikings this upcoming Saturday. I'm Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and Locked On Broncos is your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day. And I'm joined alongside my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. He's a Broncos analyst now for the Locked On Network and 9 News, as well as me. You can follow him on Twitter at Sayre Bedinger. Sayre, obviously a lot of storylines these last couple of days. The Broncos, we knew a few days ago, traveled up to Minnesota, joint training camp practices, both teams getting better in these reps against each other in team periods, even though that the field is split up into 4 different sections and you can only have eyes on a certain amount. And I think that's been one challenge so far with these joint practices. You're seeing different storylines come out from Broncos reporters and also Vikings reporters that maybe tell different stories. But, first off, how you doing, man?
Doing great, man. Doing great. Yeah, it's really been interesting to see the difference of reports from both the Denver media and the Minneapolis and Minnesota media, and these people seeing not completely different things, but at least in regards to the quarterback position, something totally different. So it's been fun, man. I think it's done exactly what they set out to accomplish. Like you said, teams getting better and getting ready for this first preseason game.
Well, right before Thursday's joint practice with the Vikings, we heard from Broncos general manager George Paton. He had some interesting comments. I mean, he clarified and provided a little bit more context to the cornerback versus cornerback talk that we had in yesterday's episode, Locked On Broncos. But he mentioned something that stood out to me that I don't think we commonly hear from a lot of NFL GMs, and it makes me wonder. He mentioned that teams have been calling the Broncos about their cornerback depth and looking for some trade options. Now, first off, just your general thoughts on this, kind of threw me for a curveball once we heard that, because usually these discussions happen internally behind closed doors. We know that calls happen all the time, but now that it is public, knowing that the Broncos secondary is such a strength, I mean, is this also a tactic to maybe increase value, or, are there any Broncos cornerbacks potentially on the trade block here?
I thought it was a really interesting comment, Cody. And like we talked about before the show, you just really don't hear general managers get so specific about this kind of stuff. You might hear them kind of with what they call like the coach speak, or I guess in this case, the general manager speak with, we've been getting calls, but nothing substantial in the works. And obviously George Paton didn't say, we've got a deal for a corner on tap, but he did specifically mention that they've been getting calls about cornerbacks. And I think that does, like you said, and I didn't think about this until you just said that, but it does kind of help drive up the value of those guys. You've got 4 starting caliber corners, and how often are you going to be able to use them? We've talked a lot about the Broncos using nickel and dime package, and even more dime package now with the addition of Pat Surtain II. But it's going to be really fascinating to see. And I think that, besides Surtain, you could really kind of look at any of the other 4 of the top 5 guys and be like, all right, I could maybe see a trade going down for any one of these guys. It's not out of the question, I don't think. So very, very interesting.
Well, let me throw this question to you now, because you look at it, obviously Patrick Surtain is safe from trade. I also think when you look at it, Ronald Darby's safe because of the fact they signed him to a 3-year deal. Now, I look at a couple of the options on the team. I don't believe the Broncos would trade Michael Ojemudia just because he's a second-year player, and he's a guy that, if we go to George Paton's opening statement as GM, it's about developing these young guys, and he has a lot to develop on. The Broncos really like OJ. So for me, I look at the Broncos cornerback roster right now, the depth that is, the talent that is there that we've been hearing about. And there are 2 guys that come to mind that I feel like if, in fact, the Broncos were to trade any of them, it would either be Bryce Callahan or it might be Kyle Fuller, because both those players are essentially on 1-year deals right now with the Broncos organization. Now, for example, if that is a move that the Broncos are going to do, it'll be a linear shift, I think, because then you can expect Patrick Surtain to probably be the starter week 1, regardless. But between those 2 players, which player makes the most sense at this point that the Broncos, if they do trade a corner, who it would be?
That's a great question. And I think you make a great point about those two guys being on essentially one-year deals at this point, making them the most tradable. I feel like with Kyle Fuller and, his age and his price point right now for the way that he's played the position, I think he would have tremendous value. With Bryce Callahan, you could probably get decent value, but at the same time, teams got to be wary about his injury history, right? So I feel like Fuller may have the best value, and it may make the most sense in terms of if you want Callahan to play in the slot, then you could, like you said, you do that linear move and put Surtain into the outside corner role, or even Ojemudia if you really plan on doing the whole dime thing. So, and yeah, I think that does make plenty of sense. But you could also do the same thing with Callahan, and you could stick Surtain in the slot. I mean, I don't think there's any limit to the options. And I wonder also the timing of this. What does this mean about how quickly Essang Bassey could be getting back out onto the field? And I know the Broncos coaching staff likes him. I know you've talked about him a bunch and did some film stuff on him last year. So I think that he's another option. If he's healthy, that cornerback room is borderline too deep, which is kind of crazy to think after last year, but it's a good problem to have. And I think you're spot on. I think we could see one of Callahan or Fuller be those kind of coveted guys from other teams.
Well, and I just go back and it just kind of it shocks me a little bit, Sayre, because the fact that we talked about, this Broncos secondary is so dang talented. You have the problem of how do you get all of them on the field at the same time? I don't necessarily think that's the issue, but with this thinking, if I were any NFL team that needed help at cornerback, of course, the team I'd look to call is the Broncos because they have 5 to 6 guys that deep at that position. Now, I don't think that they'd look into trading a rookie option like Kerry Vincent. I think Kerry Vincent still has to prove to make this roster here, despite the fact he was a 7th-round pick and he's super fast, but you can't make the club from the tub. And the injury stuff has been a concern for him, and he's gotten off to a slow start. One of those players that's been behind the game a little bit, like Baron Browning and even Jamar Johnson, as Vic Fangio had alluded to. So we're going to continue to monitor the Broncos cornerback situation. Obviously, they have a lot of very talented depth NFL teams out there. They may need it. But for the Broncos, to me, under George Paton, the only strategy I could see for this, I don't think that the Broncos would trade a player for a player. I think that more so the deal would probably be to acquire capital. And, George Paton seems to be the guy that, he's always trying to load up the arsenal, the war chest. And it may even happen here so far before the NFL season actually begins. So, Sayre, this is something I know that you and I are going to continue to monitor for Broncos country. But Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, we're going to recap day 2 of the Broncos Vikings joint training camp practices, reflecting on day 1 as well from Wednesday and Thursday. We're going to talk about really what we're looking forward to going into this upcoming game on Saturday, not to mention our favorite players to watch that Broncos fans should have their eye on this Saturday. We're going to do that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, folks, let me tell you about Built Bar, which is one of the sponsors of today's episode of the show. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market, and I'm very happy because they have just brought back the peanut butter brownie flavor. Yes, peanut butter brownie. It tastes exactly like peanut butter. It tastes exactly like brownie. The bars are covered in 100% chocolate, and they are soft and easy to chew. They have 9 amazing, delicious flavors, including the occasional limited time flavor from time to time, some really good special flavors over there, built.com. Not to mention, Built Bars, they're healthy. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss out when it comes to protein bars and chocolate. There's a misconception there. Built Bar is extremely healthy for you. 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. It is the best bang for your buck, and I want you to get your hands on a box of Built Bar today by going to built.com, using promo code LOCKED15 at checkout, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. Bill just did something really cool, too, by the way. They just paid for 36 BYU walk-on scholarships, and that is a really awesome thing. And that's another reason why I think you should support Built Bar. So go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order today at built.com. And Sayre, obviously the Broncos wrapped up joint practices with the Minnesota Vikings today, and what we saw was just a mix in a combination of 2 days. The offensive line having some issues with snap placement, high snaps, low snaps, and sometimes just assignment right there. The offensive line has definitely come under question a little bit, but, I'd be remiss if we don't talk about the biggest story that happened after Thursday's practice, or during it, might I say that, and that is running back Mike Boone pulling up after a nice run and being carted off with an apparent lower leg injury. And it could be, as Vic Fangio had mentioned in his post-practice presser, is that it could be a quad injury. Now, we don't know at this point what the severity is for Mike Boone, but look, this is a big blow early on because he was a key offseason acquisition. He was already so heavily involved in the 4 core on special teams, and also all the reports out of camp from what he's been doing as a running back. I mean, this is a significant blow if he is, in fact, going to miss a long period of time, which, look, I hope that's not the case. But what are your initial thoughts so far on the Mike Boone situation?
Yeah, just a really big bummer. It's definitely, something where you want to see the entire team get into the regular season healthy. You want to be able to put together the 53-man roster with all the guys that you signed or drafted or traded for or planned on being there. And so with Mike Boone, especially, being such a different type of back compared to Melvin Gordon, compared to Javonte Williams, really got that big pop speed. And what it sounds like to me, I watch a lot of baseball, Cody. What it sounds like to me is just like when a baseball player is giving it everything that he's got to get down the first base line, and they just pull up. They just pull up with something. And unfortunately, those injuries can linger if you don't give them the appropriate time to heal. So it is probably going to take him some time, but hopefully Mike Boone, hopefully he gets back on the field sooner than later.
Yeah, I know we're all waiting the prognosis from the official team doctors. Obviously, maybe getting MRI, it could be an x-ray, but if it sounds like it's a muscular thing, more than likely MRI is the proper route, but just unfortunate. He did try to walk off the field. They just couldn't do it. So the cart came out and they hauled him away. But another Broncos player went down in practice, not as severe according to the reports so far, but obviously something I think we should monitor as of concern. Dalton Reisner suffered a leg injury as well and limped off the field. He rejoined his teammates, but didn't return back to practice by being involved in the team periods. We'll get to the team periods coming up here in just a moment. But obviously with Dalton Reisner, I know that's also been a little bit of concern the last couple of years too. Some injuries that now he is starting to face or that has faced.
Yeah, and it seems like he's more than willing to try to play through them if possible, if at all possible. But at the same time, this makes the acquisitions the Denver Broncos have made in the past couple of years and even recently really, really critical. Last year getting Netane Muti to come in and play either of the guard spots. We talked about in our depth chart discussion about the fact that he's listed behind Reisner. All right, now's your opportunity to go in and maybe show what you can do for a few days. Hopefully Reisner's injury doesn't last too long, but we could see Muti getting extra reps into next week. Then you signed Brett Jones recently, who can play center and guard, and obviously left guard. I'm just going to throw this out there, Cody. Left guard was Quinn Miners' position at Wisconsin Whitewater. That was his primary position, and we've seen him struggling at the center position. I don't think you necessarily have to abandon ship on that idea, but I think at the same time, maybe put Miners in a situation where he's doing what he does best.
Yeah, and I think that if we're talking about flexibility, which Mike Munchak likes guys that can play multiple positions on an offensive line, and I'd say each player really on the Broncos O-line can play either guard or tackle or guard center, which is a great combination to be able to have there. But that's something we're going to continue to monitor. And, obviously one of the players that we talked about, Netane Muti, we're going to mention a little bit later as a player we're looking forward to watching. But it's more opportunities for some of these young guys to really give you an idea as to what this, what you can see. But, hopefully the injury with, Dalton Reisner does not persist, because then you have the questions about Reisner and Glasgow. If they do get banged up, that's rough. The Broncos offensive line coming into it looked solid if healthy. Now, if you factor in, if those guys are out, if they miss any time, it's a little bit of a concern. So something to monitor here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. But let's get to some of the news and notes from practice. Courtland Sutton didn't participate in practice on Thursday. He did some stretching, but this was more like a day off. Nothing in terms of a lingering injury or anything like that. So that's a good sign. I don't think we're going to see him play on Saturday. It's starting to lean that way. But some plays out of practice. Teddy Bridgewater had a rough time in 7-on-7 in the red zone period. A couple of interceptions to Kendricks, the linebacker for the Vikings. Drew Lock had a couple of plays, and Teddy had a really nice play, I think, to KJ Hamler, who just got behind the entire defense. Now, all of this coming in 7-on-7. Why do I say that? Well, Sayre, 7-on-7 is a passing drill. It benefits the offense, benefits the skill guys and the receivers. I don't know how much you want to value as it benefits quarterbacks, because everyone knows that they're throwing the ball, but you want to see those passing concepts being, executed. But George Paton had said earlier today that when you look at the health of, a guy like KJ Hamler, if he can stay healthy, he's going to be a big player for this team. He's been making plays, and Vikings beat writers have been talking about his speed has been unguardable.
And that's great, because that's exactly what we've wanted to see. Vic Fangio talked about him needing to string practices together. I think that's what we're seeing. And one of my favorite and most underrated traits about KJ Hamler, his toughness. I think that gets underrated quite a bit because of the fact that he's dealt with so many injuries, right? And so to see him stringing together some really good practices, putting that deep speed to good use, staying out there on the field, chumming it up with his teammates. I saw a video from the Broncos where he and Jerry Jeudy were working on some kind of either, like sideline greeting or a touchdown celebration or something like that. I don't know what they're going to use that for, but it was good stuff. So it's really, really good to see KJ Hamler out there working at full speed, kind of proving that maybe he can be that number 3 weapon. I know you and I have talked about the potential of Tim Patrick maybe being on the trade block, maybe not. One way or the other, I think KJ Hamler is inspiring some confidence that if he's the number 3 option, at least at receiver, he can do it.
I absolutely think so too. And I don't know how much we're going to see at KJ in the preseason. You know, we talk about guys like Trinity, Benson, these other players we're going to see. But, you know, KJ, I imagine we're going to see a little bit of him, maybe a little bit of Jerry Jeudy, not so much Cortland Sutton. Tim Patrick obviously didn't participate in practice either. So how much will we see this weekend? Now, look, there's a lot to look forward to. Saturday, obviously, a day and a half away from Broncos kickoff against the Vikings. And Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. Sayre and I are going to get into the discussion as to which 3 players are we the most excited to watch this upcoming Saturday. Before we do that, let me tell you about betonline.ag, the other sponsor of today's episode of the show. And betonline.ag is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action. The NFL season is here. We had preseason games on Thursday. We have them on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You can get in all the action at BetOnline today with all your latest sporting news, info, and odds. You stay up to date. You don't have to sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get in the game as teams prep for the runs to the start of the season. Some crucial storylines from around the National Football League, and BetOnline has you covered. So I want you to head to the website right now. Use your mobile device to sign up today. And when you do, you can receive a 50% deposit bonus on your first deposit today when you use promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, Sayre, jumping into the fourth quarter action of today's episode of the show. The Broncos have wrapped up joint training camp practices with the Minnesota Vikings. We've had a lot of Jerry Jeudy demolishing guys in one-on-one situations, which, look, I put the tweet out there. I think it's unfair in general to ever put Jerry Jeudy in a one-on-one situation. I would be mad at my cornerback coach if he said, hey, you've got number 10 one-on-one. This game, we're going to send a lot of pressure. I'd be like, Coach, why are you doing this to me? You're trying to get me out of, you're trying to get me out of the NFL. That's exactly what would happen to most guys. And Jerry is just an absolutely phenomenal route runner. But, I think everything that we've been looking at this week in joint training camp practices, you've been looking at the offensive line, D-line, the Broncos corners, the defense against the Vikings offense. Look, there's so many things that we've covered that you could go over. But the reality is, we're going to find out a little bit more about this team and the Vikings on Saturday when the Broncos play at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. Now, I wanted to get into a portion on today's episode of the show as we kind of preview Saturday's game. We'll have a full-on game preview on tomorrow's episode, Lockdown Broncos, by the way, a game day preview. But 3 players that you're excited to see the most this upcoming Saturday, who are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So offensively, I think there's a couple guys for me, 2 pass catchers. Number 1, and I've talked about him a number of times already this offseason, but Trinity Benson at wide receiver, number 12. A lot of Denver Broncos fans disappointed that Aaron Rodgers isn't wearing number 12 this year, but I think Trinity Benson has a chance to really make some noise and get that game day number 12 jersey in action this season. I think that he's got an opportunity to show things not only offensively, which the last time there was preseason action, we already saw him making big plays deep down the field, but I think also on special teams. He's a guy that's got legit 4.4 or faster speed, and he's really explosive. And now he's been with the team for 3 off seasons. So this is the time where the rubber meets the road. Trinity Benson, you've got an opportunity in this game to really stake your claim and say, all right, that wide receiver 5 spot or that wide receiver 6 spot is going to be mine now. And you guys are going to have to come after me to get it. So really excited to see him play, especially as a return specialist. I really, really hope that they've got plans to get him out there in that regard to help him make that team. Also, tight end Austin Fort coming back from his second season-ending injury. I thought it was interesting that head coach Vic Fangio talked about the fact that he could have probably come back at some point last year, and the Broncos weren't exactly a model of health and stability in the backup tight end department last year. So it's interesting that they did to bring him back, just kind of play things safe. But even as an undersized guy, he's got intriguing speed, intriguing catch radius. We saw it when he was out there healthy for the last time that he was available for the preseason in Drew Lock's rookie season. So I'm intrigued to see him play because they actually listed him above Sean Byer on the initial depth chart. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. We'll see if he can become that tight end 3 for the team. And then defensively, man, it's gonna be fun at all 3 levels. But I've been hammering home, man, I want to see these pass rushers. I want to see these guys in game situations. And I'm really excited to see Jonathan Cooper off the edge, the Ohio State product who was just named the backup to Bradley Chubb. Unofficially, again, we kind of put the air quotes with that one. The team puts it out there, but it's unofficial. But I'm excited to see him play, man. He's been looking really good. I remember when I was out in Denver for practices, he was one of the guys that really stood out to me, just his energy, his burst off the edge. his relentless effort. I think that a lot of times guys kind of gets old hearing about, defensive line players with just great effort. It's a lunch pail guy or the blue collar guy. I'm not necessarily calling him that, but what I am saying is that this guy's going to make you work every single rep, and he's got some serious burst off the edge. So I think in preseason play, that really plays well in his favor, and I'm excited to see what he can do against the Vikings backups, or maybe he'll even get some reps with the starters based on what they want to do with Von Miller and Bradley Chubb. So those are my top 3 that I'm watching for, in addition to a lot of the obvious guys that all of us want to see.
Absolutely. Well, I think those are 3 great selections. I'm looking forward to seeing Trinity play, Austin Ford, Jonathan Cooper. Those are great choices there. But my 3 that I'm looking at, Justin Sternad, right? He returned back to practice earlier this week, has been going in joint training camp practices. He was dealing with some cramping stuff, but this is a really great opportunity for him to step in and showcase, because he was asked on Wednesday after practice by the media, whether Vic Fangio was, whether or not he's making strides. He says, look, he's getting better. Now, he's not there yet, but it's going to keep coming. Every single day he gets a chance to be out there on that field, he's learning more, he's picking it up quicker, and he's going to apply it. But he says he's not ready yet, but he will be. And I think that's the thing, is we always look at the optics of wanting a player to be ready right away, when the reality is sometimes they require a little bit more time and refinement, and he missed time last year. So I think for me, seeing how he does in his first NFL action is going to be a fun storyline to watch. Outside of that, Michael Ojemudia, we talked about the Broncos, having some trade interest, from other teams calling at cornerback. I don't think he's going to be one of those guys, but for Michael Ojemudia, he hasn't been talked about a lot this offseason, and he's noticed that. And he even said, too, with the Broncos, after they had gone out and they signed these guys in free agency, they drafted, he's got a fire underneath him, and he's super excited because he wants to showcase what he can do. And now he's doing multiple positions: outside corner, nickel, dime, a little bit of that hybrid safety role. He's playing all that right now, and he's learned all that. So for Michael Ojemudia, he's one of my other players. And my last one, look, I would be remiss not to mention Netane Muti. Look, he stands out. And one thing I noticed too, at joint training camp practices, he was just, manhandling guys. He's just mean, nasty, and tenacious. And it's interesting to see the Broncos move him around a little bit at left guard, right guard, being able to see which way they can pull him, because I also think too, who you have in his personnel at, whether it be at right guard or left guard, or even at running back, who you have and what they're really good at as a rusher or as a potential receiving back, I think opens up really well for a guy like Netane Muti, who's going to get to the edge quickly, kick out a guy or seal off a guy, or whether it's a play side back or on a pull play, he's going to seal him and allow that running back to get space. So for me, Netane Muti is my 3rd player that I'm excited to watch in Broncos country. Let us know in the comment section here on YouTube. If you're watching this here on Locked On Broncos, hit that subscribe button. Let us know which 3 players you're looking forward to seeing this Saturday when the Broncos take on the Minnesota Vikings. But with that said, that will wrap up today's episode, Locked On Broncos. I'm Cody Roark, joined alongside our co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Tomorrow's episode, we have you covered with a game day preview leading up to the matchup with the Minnesota Vikings, 2:00 p.m. Mountain Time. Sayre and myself, we're going to have you covered with the post-game report as well. Here on the YouTube channel, Locked On Broncos, also your favorite podcasting provider.